Welcome to another episode of Unexpected Perspectives. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Nadja El Fertasi. And welcome, Nadja.
Thank you, Mark. I'm excited to be here today with you in London.
No, it's great that you're here today. And also today we're going to talk about leadership and emotional intelligence. So, Nadja, would you like to maybe just give a quick overview of your background?
Yes, sure, of course. So thank you, Mark, for inviting me. We met on LinkedIn. We were both passionate about emotional intelligence. My background is I used to work at NATO as former senior executive for almost 2 decades. And after 2 decades, I decided to jump off a cliff and become an entrepreneur because I was very passionate about emotional intelligence. And also, how can we enhance collaborative leadership, especially in organizations where there's a lot of pressure and high stake. So I did my certifications and licenses in emotional intelligence, and I combine my practitioner experience now with my licenses in helping leaders develop emotional resilience on their digitization journey, especially when it comes to cyber challenges.
No, fantastic. I'm looking forward to obviously continuing this conversation. And maybe let's just start off with a nice, easy question. So what makes a really bad leader?
Do you want a Dutch direct answer or a diplomatic answer?
Well, we like to challenge the conventions here. Yeah. So however you'd like to answer.
I think when I really think the question is very important because we normally look at what makes a good leader, but we also need to understand what makes a quote-unquote bad leader. And for me, it is someone who is not self-aware. If you lack self-awareness, emotional self-awareness, then your ability to inspire, to empower, to guide others will be limited because you don't necessarily know and understand yourself enough and how your emotions impact your leadership style and also impact other people. I love this quote from a book I read about stakeholder engagement in action, where the author said, managers, so you manage processes and technologies, but people are not processes or technology to be managed. They are to be inspired, to be led, to be empowered, to be guided. And especially when we look at today's era where there is a lot of change, people are change fatigue, there's a lot of uncertainty, there are a lot of transitions. Digitization journeys require tech and human as co-pilot. So change happens to us, disruption happens within us. You need leadership to help people navigate this.
Maybe just to elaborate on the leadership style. Mm-hmm. Sometimes a lot of people are confused what a leader actually means. I know you mentioned empowerment. So maybe is there a clear definition that we could utilize?
I think there is textbook leadership, right? The certifications you've done, the leadership that is correlated with your position of power, of status. I have met many leaders of status in my life. They did not necessarily have leadership skills. I have met people who were not in leadership positions who were amazing leaders. So for me, what is the difference is true leaders create other leaders. They inspire people to do better. They incentivize. So when we look at often leadership based on fear, based on command and control, you need to do this because I tell you so. That is also a form of leadership, but it's command and control. And this is what we see now with the social revolution in workplaces, that people are not taking it anymore. Yeah. And leaders doesn't mean that they don't, manage a team or have authority, but they understand what makes people tick and they understand how to ignite intrinsic motivation. So people understand and feel connected with their why and know how they fit in the bigger picture of all things.
No, that certainly resonates. I think through my own experience, there has certainly been a trend from moving away from the authority type of leadership to perhaps more of the compassionate type of leadership, which is more about empowering, trusting, nurturing staff, and people, and leadership at all levels as well. So a leader, would you say a leader is born or are they made?
Some leaders are born, but I believe that it depends. It really depends on people's personality, people's levels of self-awareness, and people's levels of growth mindset. I think a common misconception is that when you have compassionate leadership or empathic leadership, that it's not strong enough, it's not nice, it's not good for the business because it's not going to drive the business forward, which in my view is a flawed assumption, because there's a difference between being kind and being nice. When we are trying to be nice, we are trying to please the other so we feel accepted or so we feel liked. When we are kind, that's from a place of character. You can be the bearer, excuse my English. Okay. You can be the bearer of bad news with kindness. You can make difficult decisions with kindness. You can even fire someone if you need to, if you've exhausted all options, with kindness, right? Because that is also leadership. When the going gets tough, you need to have someone with a strong backbone. For me, the leadership we need is the one that treats people, not as numbers, not as functions, not as titles, right? As actual human beings. And we need this more now than ever, because people are feeling more and more disconnected in the hybrid working world, with technology, with the stress and workload. It is more important to understand how do we make the human and the tech thrive together.
So, talking about kindness, how easy is it to be kind? I know, and linking that back to self-awareness, so obviously being aware of your emotions and impacting others. Mm-hmm. But maybe it's just me. I think kindness should just be a default option. Why would you say is it the lack of self-awareness of their impact, or is it just people actually deliberately not being kind? It's often hard to understand.
Yeah, so one of the certifications I did is also on character strengths. So what makes people fulfilled, what makes them high-performing, what makes them resilient. And there was a study done by Positive Psychology and the Values and Action Research Institute, which they came up with 24 universal human character strengths. And they found that the top 5 to 7 character signature strengths are that come effortlessly to people. And when they use them in balance, then that's where they feel most fulfilled, high performance level, and also higher well-being. Kindness is one character strength. And one of the elements of this methodology is to understand when you are overusing kindness and when you are underusing kindness. And it's all about balance. So when you are overusing kindness, it means that perhaps you are displaying niceness. You are being too kind to the detriment of yourself, to the business, to the team, perhaps, because you want to avoid confrontation, perhaps. When you are underusing kindness, you may come as quite cold, detached, arrogant, not considerate. And it is always finding the balance and understanding the context. In some situation, if you're faced with lack of kindness, then you are displaying overusing kindness, there will be a mismatch. And I'm not saying you have to display the same behavior as someone else is displaying, but you need to understand when does kindness, overusing kindness is not. For a leader, it's really important, because if you are lacking energy, if you feel depleted, and then you are overusing kindness, it's just going to make you feel more depleted and feeling resentment, because you're coming from a place of empty. You don't have anything to give because you're not replenishing yourself, and then it's more difficult to be kind. What does it mean to be kind? Kindness comes with empathy, paying attention to other people's emotions, their map of the world, their needs. If we are tired, when we lack mental energy, it's difficult to put yourself in someone else's shoes, is to listen attentively, be present. And these are perhaps difficult subjects to discuss, but important to understand that it's not one or the other. There's a whole gray zone in between. There's a spectrum.
So how important is it for people to address their over-kindness, or because sometimes I see that as an inhibitor to being able to deal with day-to-day conflicts, not just in business, but in relationships more generally?
So that's a very interesting and great question, Mark. When people often, if they display over-kindness, and especially when it comes to conflict management, it means that they avoid direct confrontation. They will do anything to avoid the emotional discomfort that is inherent with conflict. So when you are overusing kindness, you may be addressing the symptoms in order not to get to the root cause of the conflict, because it makes you or the other person feel discomfort. But then all what you're doing is making space for the issue to repeat itself again. And often if we don't address problems, they become emergencies at one point. So one of the understandings, people who tend to overuse kindness, is to become emotionally self-aware, to develop emotional self-regulation, especially when it comes to conflict management. For example, if I take you and I as an example, even though there's absolutely no trigger or reason, but let's say if you would be angry right now, and if I would respond, if I would have low levels of emotional self-regulation, I would respond with that same anger. We're just going to add fuel to the fire and heat it up, because we are both coming from a survival mode, from a stress response. But if I manage to regulate my emotion and not use the same emotion back while still feeling safe. So I'm not talking about conflict that makes me feel unsafe, because then I would just walk away until we are both calm. But if it's just constructive conflict, I would remain calm, regulate my own emotion, so you can diffuse your emotion, and then we can have a more reasonable conversation, right? And I can still do that with kindness, by being curious, by allowing, because often I think what we fail to understand, at the end of the day, we are human beings who have a lot of things going on. So sometimes people, when they meet you, it's not about you. It's just you are their venting point. And it's not fair, it's not an excuse, but they have so much going on, and then it just comes out. And I think this is where you can show kindness, to not take it personal, to let them diffuse the emotion, and then make it about the issue, not about the perception you have about them or the perception they have about you.
What happens if it takes like 5 years for that for that issue to diffuse? Thinking of family situations. Sometimes it takes a long time.
It takes because people, I think it also comes with emotional maturity, because I think it's more familiar, and I may trigger some thoughts here or emotions, but it's more familiar to hold on to resentment and to being right than to feeling good.
Okay.
So it is a choice you have to make for yourself based on your core values. Is it more important to be right or to forgive and feel good?
Can you do both?
You can do both, but I think sometimes people refuse to do both because they want to get justice. They want to feel that, if you feel that there's injustice done to you, and you forgive and let go and come back together, it means like nothing ever happened, right? Yeah. This is why apologies, genuine apologies, are so important in life. They are very difficult for many people to do, especially when we get stuck in our ego and who was right and not. But I think the power of an apology, and I've seen it myself, even with my son, but also in my relationships, both professional. I am quite strong and assertive, but I'm quite self-aware. I make mistakes, and when I'm wrong, I apologize. And it immediately diffuses and lowers their defense mechanism and puts us on the same footing, because everyone knows that we make mistakes, right? We say things we don't mean, etc. But it's also, I think, there's a lot of psychology that comes into play, and personalities, and what we hold on to, and how we, how we deal and manage in life in general.
Just moving on to perhaps more of the cybersecurity and and the technology industry, and I suppose the stresses and strains that are all too common. What kind of I suppose leadership traits do you see, or some of the challenges within our industry or in our sector?
So I think there are quite some challenges.
How long have we got?
Yeah, it is. So I will talk about it from an enterprise level, from a collective level, and from an individual level. I think from an enterprise level, we are seeing, but we really need to see more of the shift going from not only technical intelligence or business intelligence to emotional intelligence. The numbers of cyber burnout are not lying. The pressure on chief information security officers is huge. They need to now be also people leaders, business leaders, data guardians, working with everyone else to implement healthy security culture so people don't represent that additional risk, which they do. Right? We don't have to call them human vulnerabilities, but they do present a significant business risk to companies. So that's a lot of pressure for people who are primarily trained to think in a technical way, in a logical way. So then I always like to use the example, our IQ, our cognitive abilities, are like an elevator. Our EQ, which is the emotional quotient that measures your emotional intelligence, is our trajectory upwards or downwards. So IQ is more long-term, strategic, analytical capabilities, versus EQ is more immediate. How do you deal with your challenges? If you are trained to think your way through life and not be able to feel, then you are going to have high levels of stress managing your challenges. This is one. And this is why when we see the added risk to burnout is how do we evacuate the stress, not only on a physical level, but on a mental and emotional level. We go to bed with a lot of invisible stress factors that keep turning in our heads. The second dimension, when we look at it from a cybersecurity perspective, is that social engineering scams use emotional manipulation techniques to trick people, either to build connection based on emotion of trust and connection and validation. Nice, people are nice, so they won't challenge. Or they're using stress, fear, speed in order to get people to act and release data, as we see with CEO impersonations, because they fail to challenge authority or to double check because speed is king. So these are all emotional challenges. And if the cyber industry is now looking more into this, often it's said that social engineering is too complex. From my personal experience in NATO for over 15 years, because we were always dealing with social engineering based on state-sponsored and commercial espionage. I mean, it's not as complex as we have to make it. It's just training people in their map of the world, how to become emotionally intelligent, emotionally mature, emotionally empowered, to live healthier, not to live healthier. What I mean is to have healthier cyber hygiene, so healthier ways of working. Ultimately, and when that is from a cultural level, and how do you trickle it down to leadership? It means leadership based on empathy, based on compassion. Leaders who lead by fear will have people who work for them who will do everything they can to reduce the fear, but not the root cause. So if they get a request to transfer a payment to release data from their boss, who is not their boss, it's fear, we'll do it right away, otherwise Mr. X is going to be mad, right? If you look working with younger people who want to impress, peer pressure, which happened with Jack Teixeira in the Pentagon, who released classified national U.S. security information on Discord gaming channel, likelihood is peer pressure. So these things also add to, leadership can play a role in diminishing the risk. And then when we look at it from an individual, often when they do the cybersecurity awareness training, they don't necessarily care that much because it's just a tick in the box, and they look at it from a conscious perspective. What do I mean from a conscious perspective? 5% of our conscious mind is what drives, what now I'm paying attention, how I talk, how I look, if I did my hair okay, that's 5%. 95% is subconscious. We don't necessarily think about these behaviors. So this is why they know what to do, but when they're stressed or when they feel under pressure, their emotion comes in, they do something different, right? This is where you have to then use emotional intelligence so people understand the why. They see it, they feel it, they believe it, and it's going from awareness to understanding to new habits. And that is a combination of both IQ and EQ.
We've talked about the leadership and having that compassionate leadership as opposed to the authority style leadership. How important would you say that organizational culture is in creating an environment where emotional intelligence is at the level where it needs to be and recognized as an important facet throughout the organization? And what can be done to actually, if it's not where it needs to be, I'm sure there are many organizations which aren't where they need to be, actually probably the vast majority. So how can we change that?
Well, that's critical, if you ask me, for several reasons. So first of all, when someone makes a mistake, when someone causes a data breach, I think from a cybersecurity perspective, the earlier it is discovered, the better it can be contained. If the organizational culture lacks emotional safety, psychological safety, people are going to put it under the rug. It's probably nothing. I don't want to be seen as the one who made the mistake, and be disciplined. When I was working at NATO, actually, there was no judgment around it. It was a culture that people had security violation. We were disciplined, but we didn't necessarily feel bad about discipline. It was just part of the culture. Even people high up got security violations and were disciplined as well, which is a very important statement. Security people did not make a distinction whether you were the Secretary General or where you were Nadja sitting in her office, right?
Yeah.
But that is important, accountability. Especially leaders at the top need to also be held the same accountability level, because what often happens, if you want compliance in cyber hygiene, people are going to say, well, if leader or manager X is not doing it, why should I do it? Unfortunately, it comes back to the kindergarten. If they don't do it, then I won't do it either. So this is one area. The other is now cyber is a business risk. You have laws and regulations coming out that are not the holding management entities responsible. A lot of people don't necessarily, they feel a fear around talking about cyber because they lack understanding or they feel foolish asking questions. If you as an organization do not have a psychological safe space or environment in place where people can ask questions without feeling stupid, without feeling judged, understanding how these criminals and scammers use emotions. Romance scams is $1 billion honeypot. Cryptocurrency scams, so these are all emotions. Now, if you do not allow space to have these conversations and to educate the people in a way where they don't feel judged but curious and empowered, now that is going to reduce your data surface attack.
What do you think the role of regulation and legislation is in helping to create the right culture? And in some respects, has it gone too far in certain areas, or is it not far enough?
That's a great question, Mark, because you provoked a thought in me now. I mean, with NATO, we were always dealing also with regulatory stakeholders. I'm not a big fan of only using carrot and stick. I think it is important because as human beings, we don't only comply by kindness and compassion and emotional intelligence, unfortunately. So you need to have that balance in place. However, I do not believe for the long term, for a holistic solution, that the carrot and stick is going to get us anywhere, because companies are going to continue doing what they think is best, and some are willing to pay the price for that. The challenge is when we look at the cybersecurity industry, I feel, and I've talked to other leaders in this industry who also feel the same way, it needs to be disrupted in the way we educate and we deliver and we empower people on cyber in today's age. And it is not at the moment, because this regulation is getting stringent. So we keep doing the same things, but we expect different results. So if we continue on this road, the regulations are just going to use more carrot and more sticks.
Yeah, I think certainly from my experience, I think we're getting into a stage where regulation legislation is overcompensating for, I suppose, the business risk decisions that aren't being managed properly, and holding businesses to account to understand their risks and manage the risks, as opposed to over specifying exactly what should be done at every point in time, because every business is unique and different, creates that that almost like that quandary of impossibility to comply with the plethora of different do that, jump high, jump low, and succumbing to financial and personal sanction as well, which, going back to the stresses related to security leaders, they are now under that threat, or real threat of criminal prosecution as well.
Exactly.
So you're not making it easy. They're not making it easier from my personal view. They're kind of like.
And this adds to the CISO stress, because now you have CISOs. I always say it's a double-edged sword, because you have all these vanity around being a chief information security officer, working in cyber, getting these awards, and which is all amazing, and we need to recognize people. But on the other hand, can you imagine the invisible pressure they carry, because they join a company, they sign a non-disclosure agreement, they're basically often the black sheep of the company if something goes wrong, which is why regulations now, like the NIS2 directive has come out, that holds management entity across the board responsible. Cyber security is also now a board risk. And interestingly enough, when Joe Sullivan, so the former Uber CISO, who was charged with criminal charges but who did not go into prison, actually came out the closet and said that he did communicate to the CEO and to his chain of command, right? So even if those processes are in place, and now it doesn't necessarily mean that accountability was there, which is now we see the regulation shifting to holding not only the CISO or the person who's accountable for cyber as a risk responsible, but also the board, the governance stakeholders. When we look at investors, they are also now having a responsibility, especially startups that have a high percentage of young workforce as well, or highly technical workforce, based on speed, customer satisfaction, user experience, and often negate the data integrity, right? Rolling apps into market too soon that then open up the doors for malware. And we are all big on technology, which is all great, but imagine you have all the locks in the door, you have the camera on, and then you have someone coming in, unlocking all the locks and putting the camera off. That's the human in the loop. So, and it can happen intentionally, but also a lot of time unintentionally. So you need to have, like what I call them, emotional firewalls in addition to the technical firewalls.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think people, as we know, the human factor is both the cause of the issues and also the solution to the issues. And sometimes if they stopped and thought they would actually stop being the cause of some of those issues, so they wouldn't need to be on the other end to solve it, and life would be so much easier. Oh, there you go, solve problem.
Well, I remember from my time at NATO, we were working close with the Cyber Operations Center, and we used to organize high-level visits to the cyber operations centers. And the director at the time, we organized the military committee, and he was, presenting on cyber risks. But it was very clear that the number one risk was the lack of cyber hygiene, and how it could reduce the cyber risk with over 50% if basic cyber hygiene steps were implemented.
That's so true. I think even from my own exposure, many organizations, that's where it falls down. Fundamentally, it's once it's implemented, a solution, system, it's how you operate it, maintain it, the processes, the ongoing, and that will forever be a challenge because it's not seen as the new in thing to do for the business. It's a cost, and so we have to kind of like find that balance and educate people too.
Yeah, and it's also a human cost because it requires new habits, right? It requires people to operate in a different way. It requires to have new relationships with emails. I mean, I have clients who are like overwhelmed by emails, and it's like every notification they respond. But that's not a way to live or work, because your mind is constantly distracted, which means that you're far more susceptible to falling for phishing scams or for social engineering, because you're not alert. You are not managing your mind. Your mind is managing you.
I think it's almost going back to the self-awareness piece. It's obviously the self-awareness of oneself in terms of personality traits, but also self-awareness of your actions and your thoughts related to how you are undergoing a process.
Exactly.
So on the self-awareness side, how important is it to, I suppose, understand your personality type, or to really understand who you are as an individual? What's your view on that?
I think that's the key to living a higher quality of life. The more you know yourself, the better you know yourself, the more free you will feel. I think a lot of our stress, a lot of our invisible suffering comes because we don't necessarily understand the root cause of our triggers. And especially when you look at this technical industry, it's very difficult to go on that terrain because it's seen as therapy or psychology versus understanding how can we adopt more of a growth mindset and get out of a fixed mindset. But a growth mindset, which was developed by Carol Dweck, who is a mindset researcher and expert, and wrote and did a lot of research on this topic, it's basically the understanding that something, the neuroplasticity of our brain and of our habits, that even if we are unable to do something now to change, we can change. It's always not yet. But understanding that you have your personality is who you are, what you're used to, which also recent studies in psychology have shown that you can also change your personality. But it feels, for some people who have lower levels of flexibility, it comes with greater discomfort, because it feels if they change the way how they behave or respond or think, there's something fundamentally wrong with them. Imagine if you have a car and the motor is not working anymore. You replace the motor. Sometimes you have to replace the whole car. But when it comes to people, then you're not going to replace the whole people. So you also need to unlearn, right? Take out the motor and have a new motor in order to function, or change the whole way of thinking. And that comes with emotional discomfort. And the better you are aware of what need your behavior or your actions are trying to meet, because we all are trying to meet our needs. If we bring this into the workplace and in leadership, let's say you have a chief executive officer who is having an argument with the chief information security officer about budget. Now, the chief executive officer has a need to equally distribute based on his or her perception of business risks. And cyber or IT or security is part of it, versus the chief information security. They have a much better lived perception of the risk and the threat and the lack of resources they have, right? Their need is to feel confident enough that they have a minimum viable resiliency in place that won't break the organization. So both have different needs. Now, often we are there trying to meet those needs through non-constructive dialogues, through hidden agendas, through office politics, right? Versus better understanding, okay, what is your need and what is my need, and how can we compromise or find common ground that both needs, my need, so the CISOs need to feel confident that they have a basic risk that doesn't always need more resources. Often it does, but it's not the only solution. Versus the chief executive officer understanding that more resource and security, data security, means more high levels of confidence from their stakeholders and customers in terms of business recovery and continuity. So this is a very technical example, but when we also bring it back in personal relationship, understanding what is the need behind your behavior. If you also, a lot of people say, I am like this, which is not necessarily true. We've trained our nervous system to respond a certain way, right? And our nervous system feels comfortable to be a certain way. So we also have to be very mindful on how we label ourselves, because then we are taking away our change agency. If I did a board LinkedIn live session for board last week, where now board members have to be more involved in cybersecurity. But if you already have a perception, I am governance purely only involved 4 times a year, then your emotional discomfort with diving into more strategic or some of the technical issues of cybersecurity that are of interest or relevant to you is going to come with discomfort, because you have this fixed perception, fixed mindset. You are purely governance, or you are purely board, or you are purely high level, versus keeping a growth mindset, an open mind, and addressing it with curiosity rather than judgment.
I think your point around the ability to unlearn, which especially the later stages in your leadership journey becomes even more critical than learning itself.
Yes.
Because what you did yesterday won't get to where you want to go tomorrow, and things change, people change, and we all have to change. But to change, we have to understand we have to get to that point of self-awareness that what is holding us back, or understanding our impact on others.
Yeah.
And
for example, if I might take my own myself as an example, when I transitioned from NATO to entrepreneur, I'm quite stubborn, and I have a lot of knowledge and experience, which then served me well in certain areas, but also served me not so well. And I learned the hard way that I need to let go of what I think I know. I need to let go of my NATO experience, NATO knowledge, and relearn and be recurious and be open to seeing things from a very different perspective when dealing with certain challenges. And that was quite hard for me even as well, to unlearn that level of knowledge that I had, to say, okay, park it and just start with the complete beginner's mindset, as if you know nothing. And once I got to that point, I advanced much faster, actually, because you overcome your bias and you get very fresh, innovative ideas and perspective and solutions to problems that were quite persistent, because you're using what you know versus allowing different perspectives to emerge that can only come when you keep an open mind, when you look at things from a curiosity perspective.
So imagine we're working in an organization and we're coming across 1 or 2 people that perhaps do not necessarily or cannot change. How does one navigate those situations in business? Because I think probably from your own experience as well, you will often come across this personality type that either doesn't want to change or doesn't recognize the need to change or aren't displaying the leadership qualities that you'd like them to display to enable you. How do you navigate those situations?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And so I will share my own experience. So I think, first of all, it's understanding people's levels of flexibility, which is an emotional intelligence marker. People who tend to have lower levels of flexibility, they are more rigid and resistant to change, right? It's more difficult for them to change their mindset, emotions, and behavior, versus people who have higher levels of flexibilities that are more apt at adapting their emotions, mindset, and response options. So if you are leading a change initiative within a culture, you want to have change champions with higher levels of flexibility that the whole workforce can see themselves in, right? So, and this is why change agents are so important that represent your workforce, because even the most skeptical person with the lowest levels of flexibility, if they are good buddies or good colleagues with someone who has higher levels of flexibility, they will not change their personality, but they are more likely to go with it because they see someone they trust, right? Yeah. So that is very important one. Second, I think from my perspective, my role was stakeholder engagement, and I managed to build, I was known as the network ninja in NATO because I could get almost anyone, even like, I remember I used to go with my former boss who was a German military general, and we used to go into the military's officer. So he had him with his military uniform, and then you had Nadja with her heels. I injured my Achilles heel now, so I don't wear heels anymore. But at that time, I used to wear heels and my dress. So their first impression was only, you can only imagine what their first impression was. But then as we started talking and I knew exactly how to talk about what was important to them and in their map of the world, I actually developed very amazing relationships with some of the most skeptical military generals you might meet. It's because when you try to convince people or try to change people, if I am trying to change you, Mark, your defense mechanism is going to up, right? Because you're going to feel threatened. It is not about convincing, it's about influencing, it's about seek to understand before being understood. It's how can I help you? It's about building those relationships, right? When people feel more confident for trusting, then they are more willing to do things differently. Ultimately, from a business perspective, you don't need to change personalities. You want people to do things differently at the job that meets your business outcomes. So how do you get that shift in behavior, in new habits, right? And you make people, the more comfortable they feel, the more they understand, the more they will shift. And if you are adamant about you have to do it my way or the highway, then the resistance is going to go higher.
Now that certainly resonates. I think I often like to think about, as a role as a leader, what we're trying to do is not tell people what to do. We're trying to facilitate that self-realization and exposing them for them to come to their own views, because that's where the power comes from.
Exactly. And this is where emotional self-awareness is critical for leaders, because why is it so difficult? Because now we're talking about it, sounds easy, but in practical it's more difficult, because leaders, they have a lot on their plate. So they feel a lot of stress and pressures themselves. And when our brain interprets that you don't have a lot of energy, it's going to use your energy to keep you safe, to keep your organs functions. So it doesn't have a lot of mental bandwidth to demonstrate proper empathy, to lead, to inspire, to understand. You need to feel more neutral to positive emotions into truly having an impact on others.
Do you think it's because of a detachment from how a leader perhaps perceives they're going to get an outcome, rather than a leader thinking, you know what, forget about the outcome, it's about making sure that the team understand what that outcome is and what do they need to help them deliver that?
I think so. I also have seen and witnessed and experienced that some people are not made for leadership position when it comes to motivating people. They are there for purely business numbers, purely own interests, and then they can, you can be as self-aware as you want. It's not going to work because you're not necessarily driven by the greater good of the team, right? You're driven by your own interest. Sometimes we have highly technical people who have no interest in leadership positions, who are put in leadership position and who suffer themselves, because it doesn't mean that they are bad leaders or toxic leaders. They just lack the leadership, the people skills in order. They much rather be independent, solving highly technical, genius problems than dealing with Mr. A or Mrs. B on how they feel today about their workload, or how someone talked to them or looked the wrong way. I mean, it's got very uncomfortable. So I think from an HR human, I worked with someone who was literally in charge of HR, but who had no leadership skills at all, who was much more rather interested in the business side. And that impacts the whole team, right? Because people feel very uncomfortable and difficult, and it just kills a climate of a team. So I think emotional self-awareness, I've always said, even when I was at NATO, I did manage people and I love to manage people, but I never wanted to be in charge of like a whole team doing management, because it's a lot of administrative, it's a lot of I was much more leading to inspire, to empower, I'm very ambitious as well. So I knew that about myself, and that's how I also guide my decisions and how I show up. So you have to, other people are much more into the management, to day-to-day, to managing, the administration side of people, and how to, and they are excellent at it. They don't need to inspire or empower or even be at the forefront. And when you use people's character strengths and when they're inherently good at, you can make the whole difference.
Do you think organizations know what a good leader looks like, or is that often a challenge of how to identify leadership potential? And you smile as if the answer is an easy one.
Well, it's actually, I think it's the concept of implementing lessons learned.
Oh, yes.
I think we learn a lot of lessons, but we don't implement it. I think if you're a totally new organization, less than 2-3 years, it's more difficult because you don't have a president. But I think a lot of organizations have institutional knowledge, and they can see patterns from past culture. And it takes additional time and effort to lead an cultural change, and to hold people accountable in leadership positions where they should not be, because there is politics involved, there's business, involved there. And but I have seen in my career, and I'm not necessarily talking only within NATO, but even in other organizations, sometimes they hold on to a toxic leader, and even if the whole team leaves, burnout or sick leave or going somewhere else, they hold on to the one person with a leadership position, and they're losing people, right? High turnover. And there's no logical explanation why that is happening, yet it happens, right? So unless you have leaders on the top who understand that we went through several transitions throughout our history. We went to the manufacturing revolution, to the industrial revolution, to the digital revolution, and now it's social revolution, right? This is where this concept of quiet quitting comes place, where the people are doing bare minimum. So, and even now a lot of organizations are going on the hype of artificial intelligence. You still need people. Right? A lot of people have been fired, but they will soon come to realize that was not maybe the best idea, because remember when ChatGPT came out, and look how dumb ChatGPT is now. I'm sorry to say, but sometimes I need to wait for hours. So it is really
dehumanizing relationships.
Exactly. And I'm not saying that AI is dumb. What I'm saying is you need to allow time, right? You need to understand how can we upskill and reskill people, because what is more important now than ever is asking the right question. If the artificial intelligence is not yet advanced enough to actually do the human thinking. It's being programmed. Sometimes it's still biased in certain areas with mistakes. critical thinking. We are losing our ability to feel emotional discomfort. So it makes us, Professor Robert Greene, who was an authority in human behavior and a fascinating man, he said AI is making us dumber. I don't necessarily fully agree with that, but I do agree with the fact that the need for instant gratification or information is making us dumber, because our biggest human breakthrough and the way our brain works, rewires, and comes to a new conclusion is by making errors, which for cybersecurity is very important. How do you create a psychological safe space for people to make errors? Do they understand the consequences of their error? And then they can rewire their brain to have different actions. So they reduce the risk of data breaches. A lot of people don't have cyber hygiene because they don't understand the impact. They don't feel the impact of their action. They think, it's nothing, right, if I do this. They don't understand that it can actually cost lives if you work in the healthcare sector, or put businesses at risk if you work in a financial institution or data-intensive sectors. So all these things are really important to integrate when it comes to using human potential, not to lose our human potential in this transition in our digitization journey.
I suppose one of the things, out of many of the points you raised, how do we get to a point where emotional intelligence takes precedence in an organization, so above all the other facets? Because I see it's very much played down compared to, when we're even, I think we're taught at a young age, like it's all about getting the grades, it's all about getting the degree, it's all about competing based on IQ, not necessarily the EQ element that is going to get us to where we really need to go, which is what leadership requires, more of the EQ and the political side as well, rather than the IQ. So how do we readdress that balance? Because maybe that's part and parcel of our recruitment path all the way up to leadership is based on how good you are at doing the job, not necessarily how good you are at leading.
It's a very good question, and it's a very sensitive question. So I think first, let me address the elephant in the room that may provoke some thoughts and trigger some emotions for our viewers. But this is the whole idea of this podcast. When we look at the generative artificial intelligence and where we're going, it is going to replace quite a lot of the expertise that we are teaching people with certifications. So we use IQ to do our certifications, and I think we have to be aware and mindful on what kind of certification that we are doing now, or we have people doing, that are going to be obsolete in a few years or in X amount of years, because artificial intelligence can do it. And this is not fear-mongering or to fear people, but to be practical, because we've already seen that a lot of tech giants and organizations have fired people because of the AI without even waiting to see how it pans out. So this is something to become aware that IQ is very important. By all means, I value IQ a lot. I think intellectual capacity is what keeps us, at least keeps my brain alive. So it's not necessarily to reduce IQ, not at all, but it's understanding how do we add at an equal footing the EQ. And the EQ is necessary so people can adapt their IQ to become a strong, powerful co-pilot with AI. Because again, people change from the inside. It's an emotional process, right? And you want, so this is one important part. The other important part, in a digitally connected world, we are losing a little bit our humanity. It's a very strong statement. I'm saying it on purpose to provoke thinking, because it is dealing with people comes with emotional discomfort. There's no way around it, right? And we see a lot that we are hiding behind our screens to not deal with the emotional discomfort, which is hurting people, which is hurting businesses, which is hurting performance, which is hurting motivation, and all these things. So emotional intelligence can make a significant difference in how we maintain and ignite our human potential, how we collaborate together under pressure, how we seek to understand before being understood, how we see each other as human beings and not as experts or numbers, right? I mean, yes, we are experts and we have accolades and we have a history of knowledge, and that is all important. But at the core, we are human beings with emotions, with thoughts, with dreams, with desires, with needs. And if you don't see people as people, right, that is where the danger is, in my view. And this is where emotional intelligence is really important, because at the end of the day, even though we like to talk AI, it's not going to go that fast. So we still need, a lot of organizations are not as fast as they're still using Excel sheets to manage data, which is a huge security risk, never mind. But it's not going that fast either. So you still need to rely on people and their potential, and that you want people to want to work for you. You want them to wake up and love what they do. We're not loving everything we do every day. Even I work for myself. I love what I do. I'm not motivated every day. I'm just disciplined, right? I know how to manage my emotions, and some days I don't like at all what I'm doing. So it's not this idea about you have to be passionate, but you have to create an environment where people wake up and say, yeah, I enjoy going to work. I enjoy working. And that requires emotional intelligence. And the last thing I will say, because I know you're very eager, is, for example, a lot of times in this industry, people who are highly intelligent, they lack in emotional intelligence. And they don't necessarily know how to navigate difficult people situations. And then they are called toxic or bad, or they're gossiped about, versus they have some of the most beautiful hearts and minds. They just don't know how to deal with people. And here is emotional intelligence that can help them a lot.
So how important is purpose then? You mentioned people having a desire and need. How important is purpose in an organization in order to bring out the right level of emotional intelligence and, for want of a better phrase, help people to let their light shine?
I think it's fundamental when we look at the example. I think it was President Kennedy who visited an organization, and the concierge who was sweeping the floors, and he said, "What is your job?" He's like, "I'm helping you put the man on the moon." Right? When you have an organization where every employee knows their bigger purpose, then that's how you reduce silos and reduce organizational blindness. I think a lot of people are waking up now that, more from a spiritual side, that is there more to life? What is the meaning of all this? Do I just get up from 9 to 5 being on my phone all the time? There must be something more. We see a looming mental health crisis that is already unfolding. Corporate responsibility is key here. And when we look at it from a more practical perspective, happiness is something very difficult to measure. Happiness is an attitude and is inherently inside, right? No one is 24 hours happy. However, the founding father of positive psychology, Mark Segelov, he developed this model called the PERMA model, which is a well-being model, which is like the weather. You can measure the intensity of rain, the drops, the sunshine, etc. The same thing with well-being. And the PERMA model is positive emotions, so having higher ratio of positive emotions than negative emotions. Negative emotions are normal, right? Engagement. Now I have to rethink PERMA. Positive emotions, engagement, so how engaged are they in their work, relationships, the quality of relationships they have at work, meaning, and achievement. And the meaning is related to the purpose. When people feel purpose, a sense beyond the paycheck, that's how you ignite that intrinsic motivation. That's how they I know my why. I know how my why connects with the organization's why. This is why you find people going to burnout or disconnect or feeling disconnected with their work is when their core values clash with the organizational core values. In my example, in my last year of NATO, my signature strengths are creativity, perspective, social intelligence, so all these things, and I couldn't use them anymore in my very end of the position. So I felt more depleted and kind of without purpose. Right? And then when I became an entrepreneur, I ignited these things again. So it's really understanding what is your purpose, but not putting it on a pedestal either, because if you put your purpose on a pedestal either, then you might be looking for your purpose and missing out on life. Some days I also don't have purpose. My purpose is to wake up, clean my bunny's cage and poo, take care of offspring who doesn't appreciate it, get back behind. So, I mean, I don't know what the purpose in that is, but I think it's from an organizational perspective, do understand what makes people tick and incentivize that motivation.
Yeah. And I think it certainly goes beyond the financial, certainly.
Definitely.
And I think certainly many organizations are set up to think around setting a goal which is numerical based, and everything drives towards that number, which isn't really the core, is often a fallacy as to what really is the way. It's not just to make more money for the stakeholders and shareholders. There's a bigger question to answer for
Here
society.
is where the hierarchy of Maslow hierarchy comes in, right? And I think that the pyramid up to self-actualization, because when our basic needs are met and financial needs are met, then the money is no longer the main driver. It's what makes us feel self-actualized. How can we, as human beings, our brain always wants to achieve a goal and make another goal. So we need to be in pursuit of a goal, because when we achieve one goal, we celebrate it, if we celebrate it, and then we go for the next one. It's like always wanting more. Very expansive, right? Very evolutionary.
So what makes you feel alive? A little bit.
I need more things that need to make me feel dormant. I'm quite passionate person. So I discovered not so long ago that I am a multi-potentialite, which makes all sense. So, which why I struggled for most of my career, because I cannot be put in a box. I cannot just, if I do one thing, it will absolutely drive me crazy. For me, in order to go all in, and this is why I'm very passionate about my work, I need to feel passion for it. So I cannot go half in or 25% in. I would never do something just for the financial remuneration. I need to feel purpose, meaning, and passionate. And I feel that about several things. I feel that about disrupting the cybersecurity industry with emotional firewalls. I feel that about mental health awareness and emotional resilience, and empowering people to learn how to, sounds very cliche, but to learn how to love themselves. And I'm not talking about the touchy-feely love. It's how do you talk yourself when you're going through very tough times? How do you manage your thought process when you are dealing with challenges? How do you manage your energy? How do you see yourself in a light that empowers you, not victimizes you? How do you not correlate your self-worth with your net worth? For me, I love this statement and I live by it. You discover someone's true character, and for me this is a true leader, based on how they treat someone they don't think they need. And this for me it's very important, which I'm not always quite popular with people who are very status oriented, because for me character weighs much more. 100%. Right? So how do you treat people who don't, because that is who you, that's how you know someone as well. Right? You know someone, their true sense is how they treat others when no one is looking, not because of their power or their title, but because of their character. And you don't have to be perfect. No one is perfect. No one is perfect. So I'm very passionate about that aspect of humanity. I've discovered a new passion about now. I love cooking, and I love organic cooking. I love being a mom, and I love being a mom and taking care of my son, and have put my career on hold so I could take care of my son, and I absolutely love it. So I think it is, and that's what fuels me, doing things that have meaning and are aligned with my vision, that when I leave this world, it's a bit better because of the legacy I'm leaving. And sounds quite cheesy, but that is what fuels me. I want to this is, I think, if I can articulate it, what gives me energy is to express the highest and fullest version of myself. And I think we have so much in us that we don't dare to express or to share because we are put in boxes by other people because we value their opinion over our own happiness and fulfillment. And I was like that for a long time, and now I'm not. I do what I'm passionate about, what I set my mind of, and it doesn't have to make sense to anyone because this is, I think God gave us quite some talents, and a lot of people are sleeping with their talents.
No, that's very humbling, actually. I think it's great that you're in that position to be self-aware, for want of a better phrase, but to get to that point where it's so important to understand yourself, your passion, doing things for yourself, giving back, aligned to your purpose. And if you're not part of an organization that has that purpose, being an entrepreneur where you create the opportunities and help others to understand and realize that purpose with your expertise. No, I think one of the things that resonated with me as well was around the self-compassion side as well. That it's sometimes when people go through hardship or difficult times, finding that compassion for themselves, irrespective of what society at large or other people think. I think a long time ago, well, not as long time ago as I wish I just didn't, for want of a better phrase, worry about what other people think or feel judged or anything like that, and just do what feels right and in line with your core values as well. I think it's very important.
But that's how we get more energy, and that's how we can sustain ourselves. And especially as an entrepreneur, I mean, a lot of people, we judge entrepreneurs, some they seem over arrogant or confident, but often for a long period of time, I think no one sees the work that goes behind it, right? The everyday challenges, and no one is clapping for you until you made it in their eyes, right? It's very judgmental, especially in this industry, it's very judgmental. So you have to sustain that. And if you're going to talk down on yourself, or if you don't put the love for yourself in what you do, if you do it for others, for the likes, for the validation, for the money, your mental health is going to pay the price. So you need to, I think the biggest self-awareness lesson I learned as an entrepreneur, and not so recently, is true fulfillment or freedom in life is not in the outcome, but in mastering the process of life. I've fallen in love with my challenges. I've fallen, like, if now I have an obstacle on my way, I say, bring it on. It's not an opportunity to enhance my problem solving skills. And the last thing I will say is they did a study around this. The most resilient people are the most compassionate ones. I know when for example, I struggled a lot in the beginning and as an entrepreneur, and had some financial setbacks where I found myself, based on a series of distrusting the wrong people, made some bad business decision, found myself in a very difficult situation. And it was easier to blame myself and to say, how could you, etc. But I approached it with self-love. I forgave myself. I forgave other people. What can I do now? We cannot change the beginning, but we can change the ending, right? And I think that is what you learn the most when you learn the most valuable lessons in life, not from success. It's from when you hit rock bottom, when you are all by yourself, and now what? How are you going to get up? And those all the challenges that bring you down in life build your character. That will then, it's like I like to use, I'm Sagittarius, the arc and bow. So it's like you're being pulled backwards, only to
be released.
Exactly.
No, I think...
Did I add the dramatic effect?
I don't know. We don't have any props, I'm afraid.
It's like it's my first time where I...
Yeah, I think it's... I think what you say is completely true. I think when I think about all my learnings as well through failure, not necessarily failure, I like to think that, or use the phrase, if I was presented with that situation again, I may make a different decision.
Yeah.
So I kind of like don't even see it as failure. I see it as a lesson learned.
Yeah.
And one of the things is just to recognize where you are going, perhaps in a not necessarily wrong direction, in a direction, and be able to change course very quickly. So I think I've been exposed to, or been involved in probably about a dozen different business ventures in my life. All of them are successful. That's the way I look at it, because I've always taken something away to where I am today and where I'll be going tomorrow.
Exactly. It's all about changing your perception. I don't look anymore. When I take a decision, I don't look at them as good or bad decisions, because it takes off the pressure. I make decisions, there are consequences. So sometimes the consequences are less challenging, sometimes the consequences are amazing, right? I let go of the attachment on the outcome and focus on the process of life. How do I have systems in place? How do I invest in myself, stay very self-aware, keep myself in check? So also hold myself accountable, ask people to challenge me. I think a lot of people, they shy away from being challenged. As a leader, you have to feel challenged. You have to, like, I've had many ego deaths, and we all need to put on our place with kindness. You don't need to bring people down. And this is why I say, people who want what best for you, they will help you. I wrote in my last newsletter on Saturday, be careful whether you're just surrounded by people or supported by people. A lot of people surround you, but they don't necessarily support you, right? And I think that is people who support you, who wants what's best for you, are often the ones who will challenge you and will tell you things you don't want to hear. And those are the people you want to be around in, because that's how you grow and evolve. I mean, some of my biggest aha moments came when someone else said, Nadja. And at the beginning, I was like on my high horse, and of course not. But then I reflect, and time and the emotional discomfort goes away, and then there's a point. What can I do differently?
Yeah. Also, I find that people who are there to help you shine your light rather than shine their own.
Yeah, that's very important. I believe everyone has a light, and everyone should shine brightly. But what I believe is you should shine not so that people admire you, but through your light, they can see their light. So when I see someone shining, I think, thank you for showing me what's possible. Because if it triggers me, if it invokes something in me, it's because I desire it. If I see someone bungee jumping, there's absolutely no trigger or no desire whatsoever for me to go bungee jumping. But when I see, for example, in another area where I have a desire, thank you for showing me what's possible. You can't be successful if you're unable to celebrate other people. And if you're just doing it, the other thing is if you're just shining your light, so you need to feel validated by others, it's short term. Because unfortunately, people are very, how do you call it? Very, not volatile.
Fickle.
Fickle, right? One day they like you, and if the media or someone else decides you're not likable, then they don't like you. So if you've attached all that, I think this now maybe goes a bit deeper, but I don't know, they did this movie about, the religious movie about Jesus, and the actor that plays, who's a very famous actor, but he shared something that really stuck with me and resonated. He said, we live in a world where we celebrate people, right? When people feel celebrated for as long as it lasts, but then all of a sudden the next day it stops, right? So they're no longer celebrated. And we crave the type of celebration to be celebrated by others, by people, instead of understanding that if you are religious or if you believe in something greater than you, it is far more important to be celebrated by something greater, because that is constant, right? And that's how I view my life. For me, I value much more to be, how can I say this without coming across as I live my life based on a higher purpose, right? It's not for the likes or for the validation. Obviously, it helps with marketing and with visibility. I understand all that. But I've learned to get my validation, not even from me, but from, I believe in God. So for me, it's God. So everything I do, I show up as based on my relationship with God, with something greater. That is what keeps my integrity level in check. That's where I live with intention. And that's where I manage the loneliness also on this journey, because the people will applaud you when you are beneath them, but as soon as you go above, they don't like it, right? And that, because it's basically you're holding a mirror to a lot of people who also want to shine, but they don't dare. So you can't hate them or can't be angry. You just need to understand that, you know.
You just have to understand you can't control. Don't worry about things that you can't control. And
exactly.
I think a lot of people don't realize that going back to the only thing you can control are the actions that one does. You can't actually always predict the outcome of those actions. You've got a good idea, you've got the intent, and I think sometimes that helps you yourself to actually be able to do things.
And to not take, so I have boundaries in place, obviously, because otherwise some people will walk over you. It's not like you have to be realistic. But I don't hold resentment against people. I think this is where empathy comes in, and I wasn't always like this. I was like, difficult to let things go. But I think the more I feel connected with something greater than myself, I see it from a much higher perspective. So I love this saying. I say I love a lot of people. Half of them are not in my life. So I forgive, but forgiveness means you let go of the negative emotion and resentment. It doesn't mean you're going to have coffee or tea with them, or they're no longer in my life and they will never be in my life again. But I have fond memories and I think back with love. I don't hold against them, because this is what people don't realize. When you hold resentment, or when you're angry, or when you are having these voids, you're the one feeling it. You're the one creating ulcers in your stomach eventually. You're the one holding this emotional luggage that you have to release. How do you do that? You forgive. You forgive them and you forgive yourself. It's a process. It's not easy. And it doesn't mean that they have to be back in your life. Not at all. But the more you learn to do that, the higher quality of life you will have.
Just on the final question, what is your top tip for someone today who really wants to be the leader or needs to be the leader they have to be? What would you say the top takeaway is for today?
This is going to sound cliche, but I would say let go of the need to be a leader and just be one. The greatest leaders are the ones whose actions match their words. So if you want to be respected, if you want to be admired, or if you want to be, seen as a leader, be a leader. Don't talk about being a leader. Don't try to impress people with being a leader. Be a leader. Have integrity. Do what is right, not what is easy. Know yourself. It's an everyday process. And be a leader. Don't need to be a leader. We are all leaders inside of us, but be one. Become one.
Okay, don't try, just be.
Just be. Just be, right? Say how many people, I think, and I have met so many people, they say they were going to do something and they don't do it. The top % of leadership are the people bank their money on or everything they got. They say, they do what they say they were going to do. A lot of people don't do what they say they're going to do. So if you already got that one right, people will start trusting you. You have credibility.
Perfect.
Yeah.
No, well, thank you very much, Nadja.
You're
It's been a
welcome.
real pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you to all our listeners and viewers, and hope you've really enjoyed this episode and looking forward to the next one already. So thank you.